All right. Well, let's call to order the Port Orchard City Council Finance Committee of June 27th to order. And the first thing is the sales tax revenue report. So Noah.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you're seeing the agenda at this moment, and I'm going to change it to the sales tax. Do you see the sales tax now?
We do.
Okay, great. So this is the sales tax for the month of May. I sent this out a few weeks ago, but as you can see here, we had a great May. We collected approximately $62,000 year over year, more than 2021. So thus far, we are about 9% growth over our 2021 year-to-date actuals. $665,000 for the month of May. So that was fantastic. Overall, again, when measured against our budget, we're 40% above our budget for 2022. And when we look at it in the broader context of our biennial budget, we've received approximately 80% of our biennial budget. So that's, again, all fantastic and real positive news on sales tax.
Yeah.
And I know this is a little bit of a segue here, but Noah and I are working on sales tax projections for the framework for the next biennial budget. And we would normally take the 5-year average, which is what you're seeing there in the budget column. And then we add something to it. And we've been seeing massive increases year over year. Are we comfortable with, is it 1, 2, 3% over the 5-year average, which the last 3 years have been growing exponentially? We are seeing a little bit of a softening in the housing market right now because of interest rates. We don't know if that's a short-term anomaly or if that trend's going to continue. And a lot of what's feeding us these increases is the housing market. So just, you don't have to answer that today, but think about that as we work on the budget process. Go ahead, Jay.
No, I just weigh in for 2 cents because I didn't catch the whole spiel, but there was something on the news today talking about additional raises in the money by the feds, interest rates. So that might be something as we get closer we want to take a look at. My other question would be, is there any way for you and Noah, both as bankers and financiers, to some way try to figure out what 20 and 21, is there some way to figure out what got how much over target it was because of COVID and people doing their work at home and stuff? I don't have a clue. I just didn't know if there's something that you could take those 2 years out of the 5-year running average. That's my 2 cents.
And I'm not trying to, it also, another factor to this is not just housing. It's more people living here, shopping here too. So I don't want to be doom and gloom, but I don't want to be too aggressive. And then the last thing we want to do is have to ratchet. I mean, it's always much more fun mid-year to say, or mid-biennium to say, we got this much more money. What more do we want to do versus having covered, what are we going to cut? Because it's not coming in right.
I'd be curious to see it. Go ahead, John.
For the current 21-22 biennium, what percentage did we use over the average?
I think it was 3, wasn't it, Noah?
Yeah, I think it was 3 when we started the biennial budget.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sean.
I would just say it'd be interesting to see what a 3-year average would look like. Maybe we drop out 2, and a 3-year average may provide enough conservative approach if we took 2021 and 22.
Yeah, we use a 5-year average, and I think that would be more conservative because
It might be too conservative though.
Well, if you're going to add a percentage onto that average, it might be good to stay with the 5. And put it
Look at them both. Yeah, let's look at them both. Let's look at a 5-year and a 3-year, and we wouldn't exactly.
Yeah, that's the question. Is I'm not. Our methodology is just whether how comfortable we on growth beyond our 5-year average are we comfortable with is the going to be the question. And we don't have to solve this today.
Right.
Just planting a seed.
Yep.
Well, we certainly have been seeing some fairly significant growths in the last, during this biennium, that's for sure. So,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
staying with a 3%, I'm perfectly comfortable with, unless there's something that jumps up. But
Mhm.
okay, how about
Okay.
REIT?
So REIT actually REIT's kind of interesting that it's had this on and off again pattern here this year. So May was actually positive, up 39,000 when compared to May of 2021. So for the fiscal year, we're down roughly 2.9% when compared to 21. Again, we've talked about before, we're over our biennial budget and we're over our 22 budget. So we're just kind of really focused on, is there growth? Is it slowing down? What's happening? But overall, still positive for REIT. Nothing bad to report there, but I do think it's interesting that it is seesaw every month thus far.
Remember though, some of those big numbers that we got a year ago were the sale of income properties. You know, they aren't related to home sales that we get, you know, a consistent piece to, but when a big apartment complex building sells, you know, or the South Kitsap Mall sold last year, those get, you know, we get a big spike at one point, and then we compare against it, and we're gonna, you know, we're gonna, of course, gonna be down.
Well, you look at the big months in 21, which would be what, February, July, and
Yeah.
September.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Now I can see why we were down in February of this year compared to February last year, but I'm not sure April would have that.
Don't those 2 months trailing behind?
Well, we're tracking the same.
Oh, I get it.
Yeah.
Right, but it would be from December, those
Right.
numbers posted in February.
The, my thing was, it would be questioning about the amount of inventory available. And I think that we're going to see a considerable amount of inventory within the next couple of years, over the next couple of years. So we may see REIT still being, aggressive, depending again, what happens to mortgage rates.
I would add too that Stetson Heights, there are about 70 homes completed that are sold, but they can't close until they complete this water booster pump, which is pretty near complete. And so you're going to see a whole bunch of closings all at one time here in a few months of things that have been built and available, and they just couldn't occupy them because of the lack of water.
Point.
Good point.
No, Sean raises a good question. I guess I've never asked it. I know there's a 2-month lag in sales tax. Is that the same for REIT as well?
You know, I don't think it's a 2-month lag, but I would expect there to be a lag. I don't know if it's 1 month though, or 2.
I never asked that question on REIT, so don't know.
Good question, John.
Yeah. So I guess I'll pose this, since the mayor already posed this on the sales tax. So the last 2 biennial cycles, we've only budgeted $700,000 per year on a REIT. There wasn't really a big magic to it that I can tell, but that's been our long practice, is of 700,000 per year. Is that something we want to think about either increasing or just leave it the same method going forward for 23, 24?
I think we should adjust it. I just think we're living in a different time. I think the acquisition prices are much different today than they were even 5 years ago. And so I think we should adjust for what we've seen inflation the last few years. Again, take a conservative approach, but I don't think 700 is the right number. I think it's too conservative.
Yeah. Although 2021, I don't think it's $2 million either.
I didn't say that. I didn't say go to the high water mark. I just think we should recalibrate, looking back, like, again, if we start with the 5-year average or 3-year average, we can look at what those numbers look like. But I think we should recalibrate to some extent.
Have you ever done the average, Noah, or we just arbitrarily pick 700,000?
I bet we looked at it. And then,
Stuck with it.
stuck with it. Yeah, because again, we've gone through some interesting budget cycles here in the midst of a pandemic, and then,
Right.
just starting to see some growth.
I think it's back to that, like sales tax, looking at a 5-year average. What does that, I think it's higher than 700 though.
We
It's
were
probably-
right in the throes of COVID, right? This time in 2020, we had no idea what was going on. So we took an ultra conservative approach. So that informed the conversations.
Yeah, and recall that REIT is used to fund our capital program.
Right.
So it's only aggressive as is if we're relying on that to fund our
Yep.
cash flow for capital program. So it has never been a big discussion because we just didn't need it to be. We had our capital program. We use as much REIT as we need to solve funding gaps and problems. And so when we need to adjust it, we would.
Yep.
Okay, moving on, we'll look at the cash investment balance. Again, I sent out the monthly budget report about 2 weeks ago. I can send it out again if you guys like. I'm just going to focus on our ending fund balance for the month of May. All positive again. Again, you see $11.2 million in the general fund. I did want to point this out, the activity of cash and investments going into the street fund. So as we discussed last month, I was making some transfers from our general fund as well as our enterprise operational funds to our capital and stabilization funds to get those out of the budget, if you will. So for example, we transferred $2 million from our general fund 001 to our street fund. That money was approved by council for preservation and pavement and all the transportation work that's going to be paid for out of 002. So to prepare for going into budget season, to prepare for having good estimates of what expenses we still have remaining, we discussed making those transfers. So you can see here, I made the transfers, therefore I've fulfilled all of our transfer obligations out of the general fund, which propped up the street fund considerably for all that preservation work that the Public Works Department is working towards. So that's all really good news. And we still have a healthy balance in the general fund, even after making those transfers. And I also made those transfers from the water operating fund to the water stabilization, sewer, and storm. And at this point, we have met our policy targets for the stabilization for our enterprise funds. So all good positions to be in going into a budget cycle where we're not going to have to focus on stabilization funds as we develop a budget.
So everything's trued up for year end.
Correct.
Okay.
It's good news.
Yep, very good.
So again, all real healthy funds, and hopefully we'll see some more expenditures coming out of the street fund and our street capital projects funds over the next couple of months as we're doing that type of transportation work.
Great.
So I'm going to jump back here to the agenda. So the next item we have is the budget amendment. I wanted to talk about that because that's coming to council tomorrow. And I don't know if you had a chance to look at it. I'm taking a different approach here. We're going to bring forward a budget amendment tomorrow to adjust and factor in personnel changes. And then I'm bringing a separate budget amendment on July 12th to factor in financial changes that have occurred. I want to do it because we just ended up getting, it was going to be a very large budget amendment and wasn't sure if I was double checking everything. So I wanted to give myself more time on the financial side, but wanted to bring the personnel budget amendment forward now because it was needed to address the changes in the DCD department. So what you'll see on tomorrow night is we are planning to reduce 1 FTE of a patrol officer position and moving it to a sergeant position. We are creating and adding a new position in the city, a deputy director of community development. We are also creating a new position for a plans examiner / building inspector 2 position. And when we create these two new positions, we are actually defunding the building official. We're not removing the position from our personnel, but we are removing the FTE. So there will no longer be an FTE there. In fact, that FTE is now going to be moving up to the deputy director position. And then lastly, we are factoring the pay scale changes that were recently negotiated. and agreed upon with the city and the guild for both patrol officers and the sergeants. So that's what you'll see in the new table in our salary exhibit. And I'll pause there to see if either Nick or Debbie want to speak to the deputy changes or if there are any questions on that front.
Nick, I have one, just the changes we're making to parking enforcement, they weren't gonna be wrapped into this. That's not, I mean, we're not changing the FTEs, but we're changing our code and our org chart, so we don't need to worry about that as far as the council's concerned. Other than the code, they have to approve the code.
You said my name. I didn't fully hear a question in there.
So my question was related to not what he just presented. And Noah wanted to make sure that if there was any questions related to these changes that he's talking about, or if you had anything to add to these changes.
No, I'll just say we are, even though, the housing market is maybe slowing down a little bit, we're still relying on our consultants at a pretty high level. And I think that the building inspector to plans examiner position is going to result in savings for the city. And right now, I don't see the workload slowing down enough to where I'm concerned about adding this position. But as far as parking, yeah, my understanding is that it's only code changes that are needed, not something in budget. Though Noah, is this moving the budget item from police into DCD, or is that not necessary?
I do not believe that is necessary because we are going to account and report for it as we're required to. And it is, as we talked about, it is an expense code out of the police department. So it will be paid for out of the police department, managed under DCD. Very similar to how DCD has a public works employee kind of over in this shop, but it's actually expense and paid for out of the public works department.
Got it.
Okay.
In essence, Noah, this is just, if you will, making funding adjustments for things that the council's already approved.
Yes, yeah. I mean, on the list provided here, the council has already discussed these. I mean, 2 of them are contract related,
Right.
the negotiations of the guild, and we have discussed defunding the building official and promoting and creating this deputy director position. And we've discussed trying to recruit a plans examiner, building inspector to take on that body of work. So we're not just outsourcing that work because that is getting to be quite expensive. And then the adjustment in the makeup of the police department between patrol and sergeants, getting to that 5 sergeant count and down to 18 patrol officers.
Right. So again, this is stuff the council has already blessed. So it's a matter of just making the necessary adjustments to the budget documents to reflect those changes.
Yes, these are all things you guys have discussed and given head nods to,
Yeah.
but have not taken a formal vote on yet.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
So I do have a preview. So this will be for Tuesday night. I do have a preview of the budget amendment to come forward for July 12th. This budget amendment is also in the same context of these are actions the council's already taken, whether they are grants that we've already received and awarded, and the council has accepted those grants. Contracts are issued to consultants. This is primarily driven to ensure that we have enough expenditure authority, and we're budgeting in for some of the actions that council has already taken. So I just wanted to briefly go through this since I have your attention now, because we won't meet till after the July 12th meeting again. So I just want to take a couple minutes to go through kind of what I have prepared here and allow you to ask any questions while we go through here. So the first couple changes are for our current expense fund. Again, this is a housing action plan grant that DCD has received. So I'm budgeting in the revenue to come in as well as the expense to go out for the consultant work. It will have a 0 impact on the fund by itself, but we need the expenditure authority to be able to write those checks to the consultant. I'm budgeting and anticipating our ARPA money dollars to come in. So another $1.4 million. I would expect those sometime this week. So again, reflecting the budget for those to come in. I'm increasing the expenditure authority of $105,000 for the IT replacement and implementation that we discussed, I think, at last council meeting. I'm including here some additional expenditure authority when we looked at the building inspection services being provided. There was a contract amendment for $210,000. So that particular line item has been going over its original budget, only because we haven't adjusted for it. So I did want to pick up some expenditure authority there. I'm increasing my transfers out to our sewer capital fund in the amount of the ARP dollars to be contributed to our marina pump station. So for that particular impact to the general fund, it's zero base. And what we find with our overall impacts to the general fund, it's a request for additional $345,000 of expenditure authority to pay for really the IT replacement as well as the building inspections. Okay. So I see headings none there. I'm gonna move on. 002, again, this one is a lot of cleanup work. We originally had anticipated the CDBG grant to be receipted into our 002 fund, our street fund. But learning more about what the grant is, it's more appropriate to record that money into our street capital fund, 304. So I'm going to reduce the revenue going into street fund, reduce the expenses coming out of that fund, and move the entire authority to 304, where I will actually record the revenue and expenses to match. Additionally, there were some road services activities that didn't get complete in 2021. So I'm going to remove that funding authority from 2021 to 2022 to ensure that Public Works has full expenditure authority in 2022 to do their road preservation work. Again, overall, you see there's zero impact to the fund. Criminal justice, this is again another action council's already taken on body worn cameras for $60,000. We talked about that being paid for out of the criminal justice fund, and I would reduce ending fund balance to pay for that. Moving on to the community events fund. Again, this is a simple moving of the expenditure authority from one fiscal year, 2021, to the other fiscal year, 2022. Again, there was a surplus of expenditure authority in 21, and I do understand that is intended to be spent in 2022. So this is more of a truing up for our biennial budget when we look at fiscal years or bienniums. Here is an actual increase. So I'm requesting additional funding at a REIT to pay for Bay Street pedestrian pathway right-of-way acquisitions in the amount of $1.5 million. We are hopeful that we will be closing in on some properties over the next half of the year. So currently we don't have a sufficient budget authority in our 304 fund, and we would then need REIT money to do that. So this is a proposal to increase the transfer authority from our REIT fund to our 304 fund to make some more acquisitions of the pathway project. And once we have better information, those come forward, the purchase and acquisitions, of course, will always come to council. So this is really just creating the budget authority for us to be nimble and flexible once those come forward. The next budget is for our impact fee fund. We have our Pottery Avenue non-motorized project, which we just received some grant funding for. We anticipate the total cost of this project to be right about $690,000. And we received a complete street grant from TIB for $650,000. So I'm shoring up the funding for that to pay out transportation impact fees of roughly $40,000. This would be a transfer from our impact fee fund to our street capital fund, again, to pay for that complete street tip 1.15 for Pottery Avenue non-motorized improvements.
That's a project in front of Cedar Heights Middle School.
Mhm.
So now we come to the large fund that has the most activity because I have a lot of money coming in, a lot more expenditure authority going out for all these capital projects. We'll just start there right in the list here. So we have the money coming in for the Bay Street pedestrian pathway. Have the correction of having the CDBG grant money coming in as revenue. I'm reflecting an increase in revenue for the for the TIB grant for the non-motorized path, so bringing in more money there. And then we start to increase the expenditure authority to pay for the Tip Lippert sidewalk, which is related to that CDBG grant. We're increasing, we're now budgeting for this full project of Pottery Avenue non-motorized at a 304, and has not been included until now, until we knew we got the award and the contracts. I'm increasing expenditure authority for 2022 So I have to do two things when we're first moving money from our REIT fund to our 304 fund. And then in our 304 fund, I'm asking for additional expenditure authority to actually go acquire the property. So that's where you see this 2.388,400,000. 1.5 is from, again, the transfer coming in, the additional revenue there, and $888,000 is actually from the 2021 expenditure appropriation. So we did not close on properties in 2021. So I'm simply moving that expenditure authority from 21 to 2022. So it's not an increase, it's just a shift in the fiscal period. You'll notice I'm like, can I comment that right here by say reducing 2021, moving it to 2022. And then I'm also moving revenues from 2021 for the Bay Street right-of-way path from 21 to 22 as well. So moving on to water capital. There were a couple new GL codes that came out this year that we did not have when we originally developed the budget. So I'm, again, just moving funds, moving $31,000 from 2021 to 2022 to cover these notes and such. Get no impact to the fund other than just moving by fiscal year. Our water debt service fund, again, you'll see I reduced 2021, increased 2022. It's a different fund. It's where we actually make the payments out of to our McCormick Reservoir. I'm also going to be, because there were new GLs, I'm almost doing a GL shuffle to make sure that we have the right budget authority in the right GL column. Although it is not increasing expenditure authority, I'm just moving it from 21 to 22 and making sure I have the right budget authority per the right GL. The storm drainage operating fund, this will actually be an increase. We anticipate we only $49,000 for TIP 1.13, the Lipper project. There is going to be some storm capital improvements as a part of that project. And so we will pay for it out of the storm fund and reduce our fund balance. The sewer operating fund, this I think was the largest increase throughout this review of the budget. I'm requesting for additional expenditure authority of $468,000 for 21 and 22. What we found is that the sewer on-call services, the pass-through contracts, utility tax, and in particularly the Pottery Lift Station project, these were under budgeted, or yeah, they came in over budget, and the Pottery Lift Station wasn't budgeted at all. So it caused this fund to need additional expenditure authority because we did not include in the original budget. But the project is complete now, and so this is more of a cleanup budget amendment to ensure that we have the correct budget authority.
Remember, the Pottery Lift Station was that emergency repair, so that's why it wasn't budgeted.
Yeah, and that was funded with some grant funding or loan, wasn't it?
Yeah, a less than 1% loan.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we are going through the process of closing out that project and receiving those loan proceeds now. I think we'll probably get them this month as well.
Okay.
And that came in a lot less than we originally envisioned, so that was a successful project.
Yeah.
Last sewer capital, you have the ARPA money coming in. And we are really trying to use this ARPA money as the first dollars in when we head into construction. We're still in the design phase. So depending on timing, right now I'm just going to increase ending fund balance. So it stays in the fund and we are prepared to use that money going into our next biennial budget. We did talk about this change here, Fund 632 early on. We do need to make that as a part of our budget. We intended on creating a new wastewater utility fund code, and I still intend on doing it so it's in alignment with our other fund structure. But I did want to take the moment to actually just get this into the budget, and then we'll come back to the fund structure and clean that part up so that it would fall within the sewer utility structure. But it does need to be budgeted as we were provided new guidance from SAO this year.
No, I appreciate your just establishing funds, but that goes from 22 to 23, and this budget only goes through 22.
You are right. Good call.
And that just triggered a thought I had too, and it's something we were talking about earlier. And Noah will bring this up in his director's report tomorrow night. we have a 6-month reporting or requirement to notify West Sound Utility that we intend to, that was the direction I got from the retreat, that we would start charging utility taxes on these other residents of our city that are provided service by other utilities. And so that notice has to happen by the end of this, or before July 1st. And so this is our last council meeting, and just confirming that is our intent to, from an equity standpoint, to charge that same utility tax rate, which is 5% on all customers. So
All right.
So what do you need from the council on that? For you to
just
be able to get that notice out by July 1st?
heads nodding that we're going to send a letter to West Sound Utility. It'll be part of next year's budget, but if we wait till next year's budget, we won't start collecting it until
Right.
mid-year next
So
year.
you have to send it this week.
We have to send it the end of the week. Right? This week, you're right, for us to be able to collect it at
Yep.
the beginning of the year.
So I quickly walked through all the explanations of the budget amendments. Now, we always put in the table to depict what occurs in the fund. So I'll again take 5 minutes, just kind of walk through that so you see the financials, because we walked through the other part very quickly. Beginning fund balance is roughly $7 million. Revenue is going to increase, expenses are going to increase, and we'll end the year at $2.8 million from a budget perspective. Now, I do say from a budget perspective because we look at the fund balance of all these accounts every month. And as you can recall, the general fund 001 has about $11 million in it currently. So we kind of use 2 gauges: A, where are we at currently, year to date, and am I accomplishing the goals, such as to make sure I have enough budget authority within each fund to close out the year. The street fund also, you'll see no impact here, because again, the revenue is that CDBG grant going in. And so I'm reducing actually revenue here, and I'm reducing expenditure authority, because this money, this project should be paid for and recorded out of Fund 304. So you see no impact to the ending fund balance. With the criminal justice fund, the $60,000 for the body cameras, we budget a reduction of the ending fund balance to pay for that. Again, although I have it in my table because I am doing things, I'm moving expense authority from one fiscal year to the next fiscal year. And you'll see this on several funds. There actually is no impact from a council perspective. One thing that we do is we do budget adjustments, which is at the authority of the finance director. So I can move within GL codes, I can move within fiscal years. But if I'm requesting additional expenditure authority, that's when we need council's approval. So a lot of these entries are just adjustments, moving them from a GL code or a fiscal year. But by way of good practice, we like to share that with the finance committee and the council of the adjustments we are making.
Makes sense.
Yep.
And again, here for 109, you see the $1.5 million for the purchases. We have anticipated a reduction of our REIT balance. Similar here with our impact fee. This is the $40,000 for the, I think it's Pottery Avenue non-motorized project. That's $609,000 to be paid for out of the Fund 304. So a reduction in that particular transportation impact fee fund balance. Here you see an increase in revenue of $2.4 million roughly, and an increase of expenditure authority. So here's where I'm actually asking for additional expenditure authority from the council. Moving on down, again, have the water capital, water debt service. Again, you can clearly see that these are changes in fiscal years and GL codes, and no action on the actual budget overall has changed. Storm, again, we are anticipating needing additional funding for TIP 1.13, and that will be for the storm drainage project, storm drainage operations fund. And then moving down the sewer operating, again, $468,000 for the biennium of additional expenditure authority, and we anticipate reducing our ending fund balance budget. Sewer capital, increase in revenue, increase in ending fund balance. So you see our actually ending fund balance grows there from 7.6 million to some $1 million. And then lastly, this wastewater treatment facility fee, when we developed the budget, we did not believe we had to make it as part of the budget as it is a fiduciary fund. We have since learned that it does need to be part of the budget. So I am officially making it part of the budget. And at some point we will reclassify this appropriately, but at least when SAO comes in, I can show them, yes, the expenditure authority is a part of the budget.
Be nice if they quit changing the rules.
So this is the budget amendment I propose coming forward on July 7th. If there's any tweaks or changes from then here, I'll let you guys know. And are there any questions on that budget amendment?
It'd be probably July, what, 12th, right?
Yes, July 12th.
Oh, looks good. Thank you for walking us through that.
In essence, though, we would see a potential adjustment to kind of clear things up at the end of the year as well.
Yeah, there will definitely be additional budget amendments before the year's up. We always do one before the end of the year, the cleanup. So
Right.
this is almost a semi 6-month cleanup. So we did the mid-year review where I cleaned up for a year of different stuff. This is another 6 months of cleaning up stuff. And so we'll definitely have one more before the year's out, if not something else occurring where we need to take additional action.
Well, and I think especially being that we just settled the collective bargaining agreements, that really is driving the need to do it now.
Mhm. Yes.
Along with, I mean, there's other things as well, but it's nice to be able to have the authority to pay people that we agreed to pay them.
I agree.
Okay. Any questions? Comments?
Thank you.
All righty. Personnel.
So with that, Rob, I did have you on here to talk about a memo with the police guild.
I'm glad that Debbie's here. I think that has to do with the, we're not paying them properly for the, or is this the?
No, this,
I was gone last week, so I'm still playing catch
Okay.
up. What are we talking about?
Debbie.
Yeah, this one has to do with the 5th sergeant. So at tonight or tomorrow night's meeting, you'll be asked to move that FTE from patrol to sergeant. And the idea behind that additional sergeant position in the police department would be that the chief would finally have enough supervision of the patrol that he could actually assign a sergeant to detectives. And that'll be a first for Port Orchard. And the union asked to bargain that impact. And the city has drafted an agreement and the union is in agreement with it. And you'll see it confidentially, but we'll have it on the meeting for the 12th that we will essentially agree to pay the detective sergeant the same premium that the patrol officer, when they get assigned to detective, receives, which is a pay stipend and a clothing stipend.
So, and it's beauty that we get to negotiate that, but when we looked at our peers, actually Paulsbo does this same practice. So there was examples to point to, so that they're doing this additional thing and get a stipend for that when they're performing those duties.
And the cost is pretty small, and in a sense, it may actually save us money right now. The sergeant kind of wearing multiple hats and serving on some teams that this newly assigned sergeant would do. Our sergeant's working graveyard, and a lot of the meetings and things that he needs to attend happen during the day. So he's putting in immense hours of overtime. Once we're able to assign a detective to do sergeant, and that person gets tasked, or a sergeant to be detective, that person will get tasked with some of these committees that are county-wide, and that'll be during the daytime. So we may actually see a little kind of a wash.
Okay.
And then, as Noah was typing there, we added an agenda item this morning, and Noah just added it to your agenda about 30 seconds ago. But it was at your direction, to have a discussion about the TBD sales tax. We talked about that as a discussion at the last council meeting, and you asked for some additional graphical displays and so we said we would bring that back to this committee and to transportation committee, and then we would bring it to back if both committees agree to the work study meeting in July. So Noah.
Yeah, that's a great introduction, Rob. So here is the memo that the mayor provided from the last meeting. And I think he also had some additional appendix pages that laid out the assumptions of the forecast, but I just want to cover this real quick because then we'll go into the depiction of it. So what we were looking at is the councilmatic 1/10 sales tax over the 10 years. That's the new legislation allows us to do. And what we found in our projection, our forecast, that the first 3 years of revenue could range from $2.5 to $2.75 million. When we couple that with our transportation impact fee funds that could be used for the Bethel Phase 1 project and already received Blueberry developer provided impact fee funds, it provides us roughly $4.7 to $5 million over this 3-year period of revenue to spend on Bethel. And when we broke down Bethel Phase 1, we found that magically we needed roughly about $5 million to do design and right of way for that project, and within that time frame, the first 3 years. So when we were looking at this, we were trying to identify a funding mechanism that could pay for right of way and design for Bethel Phase 1 to get that project moving forward. And then as the mayor talked about and discussed with the council could then revisit this in year 3 with a full design and properties acquired, and talk with the public about a voter approved TBD sales tax, because the distinction between that is that the voter approved TBD sales tax could be leveraged and bonded and then used to make those debt service payments for a longer period of time than just the councilmatic 10-year period.
We could also find out at the end of 3 years that we have enough in the remaining 7 years of this council action to get close. It may not be all of it we need, but get close enough to pay for Phase 1 with the 1/10 measure. But we won't know that until we have design and right of way. So we think this is a good way to get us to a point where we have good information and we can have the information. If we need to go to the public for a ballot measure, we have the data and a shovel ready project ready to go. If we need more authority, in the perfect world, we wouldn't need any more authority, but if inflation continues to run the way it's going to do, we'll probably need more authority, unfortunately.
So remind me, please, Phase 1 covers what?
Bethel, between Salmonberry and Blueberry, both roundabouts and the roadway in between. The design will include the bypass, which is improvements to Salmonberry to Ramsey and improving Ramsey as a bypass route. My gut tells me we won't have enough money to construct the bypass with the 1/10, but we won't know but that would acquire that right of way and allow us to build that. It'd be a nice thing to have for a detour route for the construction and an outlet. That gives you a right turn movement instead of going down to the traffic light at Bethel and Sedgwick.
So we would have a project, we would have a roadway that would still need work from Blueberry to Sedgwick and from Salmonberry to Lund.
Yes, it would. It's called Phase 1. There's 5 segments to Bethel, and it does allow to, based on the traffic consultant's data, gives us an outlet over to down Salmonberry for Bethel over to Jackson by that roundabout. Right now, that's a difficult intersection to come off of Jackson to because of the offset to the intersection. Left turn movement's very difficult currently at that location, or making any turning movement.
I like the approach. I like the 3 years to kind of get at some additional data and, continue to communicate this to our constituents. I think it makes a lot of sense.
So
So-
out of the last meeting, we were asked to provide some, some graphics. So I put the graphics real together. And again, this can be, I would say, supplemental to the memo we've already provided to facilitate the next discussion with the full council. So I'm going to briefly go through these. These are probably the shortest presentation I've done. I think it's 4 slides. So quick, easy, understandable, I hope. So first slide we're going to look at is the 1/10 sales tax projection itself. So to develop this, we're looking at 2 scenarios. One is a scenario where there is no growth in your taxable sales base. So it's going to kind of freeze at 2021 taxable sales. Whatever we received in taxable sales in 2021, that's what we would expect to receive each year for the next 10 years. That's one scenario. The scenario is that there's actually a 5% growth in taxable sales each year over the next 10 years. So you can see here from the blue chart, that would provide a 0 growth would provide us $830,000 per year in revenue to pay for transportation. If there's 5% growth, it'll start at $870,000 and grow up to $1.3 million. So it kind of gives you the range of possibilities between 0 and 5% taxable growth in the revenues that we could receive and use for transportation. So then I wanted to look at only the 0% growth scenario, because we were trying to fund this project with the most conservative assumptions we could. I guess I could have put a declining taxable sales base, but I did not take that approach. So I stuck with a flat or 0% growth in your taxable sales. And what we find is over the 10-year period, the cumulative revenue we can collect is roughly $8.3 million over a 10-year period. Again, that flat $830,000 per year, but each year adds to the overall pot. Now, this is where I think it becomes useful as we work as a staff and team here to look at how do we fund the design for phase 1 and right away. You'll see here I specifically focused on the next 3 years because those would be our design and right away phase. Beyond that, you're into the construction phase. And we'll take a quick look at that. But when you look at the top graph here, again, it's a 0% growth, no growth in the revenue base. Here are the revenue sources we would use to pay for design and right of way. So we have the councilmatic action of a sales tax, $830,000 for the 3 years each year. We have our allocation of our TIF for Bethel, totaling the $2.3 million over the 3-year period. We have already received funds from a developer, which the city holds for Blueberry intersection that would be applied towards the Blueberry piece of this project. And then I factored in some REIT revenue a little bit in 2022, which is already budgeted. And then looking forward, roughly $250,000 in 24 and 25 as a contributing factor to this project. And you can see down here on the expenditure side, what we would expect to expend in design costs, $350,000 in 22, another $280 in 23, another 25 and 24 and 25. And the big costs again are going to be the right-of-way acquisitions, all the pieces of property that we would need to acquire. What I really want to turn your attention to is down here at the very bottom here, which says net with carry forward. What this row is showing you is the net impact. So you have your revenue of $350,000 for 2022, your expenses of $344. For that year, you netted a positive $5,187. So that's this top row. The next row shows you the accumulation of those net balances. And so you can see with this proposed funding plan and these estimated expenditures, we would have a positive balance each of the next 3 fiscal years to pay for the Bethel and right-of-way phases. Now I'm gonna pause there because then there's lots of assumptions we made. And then we can look at the next part of the chart, which is the years 26 through 32, which is the other years of the councilmatic action.
So Noah, did you do any modeling with a 3% growth or 5? No.
I did not. I want to start with a base and to see
So
how.
if nothing grew in our economy, we could afford this, and it's likely going to grow.
Yeah, and if the growth is much higher, we could reduce our contribution from REIT as a funding source in those later years. That's an option because we're using REIT as a plug right now to fulfill this full funding plan. But then we also got to be aware and mindful of that these are just cost estimates on design and right of way. And so who knows on those?
Well,
So
revenue
this
could
would be an appropriate use of REIT funds because it's a capital project.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And to be honest, if sales tax is astronomically high, then the economy probably is still pretty hot, and the real estate costs are, well, we fixed the cost of the design contract. We can't fix the cost of the real estate till we buy it.
This is kind of an off the wall question, but Nick, if you're still there, you had made reference about was it Home Depot that's starting to look around again? That would have certainly an impact to this corridor, if assuming that they're going to come in at the place that they were planning to initially.
Yeah, so we talked to Home Depot about what the likely requirements would be, including the frontage improvements along the Home Depot site, which actually plug directly into the Salmonberry roundabout. So phase 1 and phase 4 of the Bethel corridor are right at the Home Depot property line, next to that existing little shopping center. So they would be extending those improvements south to the property line with the coffee shop there, Dutch Brothers. They're also, we talked to them about providing the parallel road network that connects to Walmart and all the way through down to Kathy and coming out on Lund. And so we talked to them about, putting together some sort of agreement, because they would be eligible for impact fee credits. They're going to pay an impact fee, but then they're also going to build a project that's on the list as part of their project. I think one of the challenges is that Salmonberry is already failing. And so it's difficult to assign the responsibility for like the roundabout to a developer when the intersection has already failed. If the project causes the failure, then it is something that is something that you can ask them to mitigate. But if it's already failed, it's very hard to do.
I guess I'm just wondering about the timing and whether or not, do you think that their improvements would negate any additional revenues for impact fees, transportation impact fees?
Yeah, I would expect the frontage improvements will actually cost more than what they are eligible for in impact fee credits. I think they're going to pay about, at the current rate, about $800,000 or $900,000, depending on the final square footage of the building. And I think that project is probably more than $1 million for those frontage improvements by the time they get around to building it. So I can't imagine that we will have additional revenue left over after they've applied for and received some sort of impact fee credit.
Well, clearly it would be a positive impact to our sales tax, but okay, thank you.
And likely we can't make them build the full road. It'd be half street, and maybe a center turn lane in there, because until we build the roundabout at Walmart, we'd be blocking everybody on the other side of the street. So they can only do their side of the street. We can only require their side of the street.
We actually talked to them about 3/4 street improvements, but it's possible the center median would be a two-way turn lane until a later date when you can actually put in that landscape median, because you do have to facilitate turning. We also gave them the option of looking at doing an additional roundabout in the corridor that would give them a full turning movement directly to Bethel, and it would have to be spaced about halfway between the Walmart intersection and the Salmonberry intersection. But I think that needs more analysis to determine whether that would actually be viable or not. But it was a 3/4 street improvement that we were asking for there.
Thank you.
So let's jump, we're running out of time here. Let's jump to Noah's 7 years remaining in the projection. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the last slide, again, I think this helps to articulate and illustrate the concept of the plan, is because you can see here, the first 3 years, we are in the green in our net carry forward. And then again, this is all cash flow funding, right? There's no borrowing this for 3 years. But once we hit 2026 and we start to introduce construction into the mix, so we're estimating about $9.7 million worth of construction costs, we immediately go upside down for the remainder of the 7 years of our councilmatic action. So as the mayor proposed, this is that time period when we would have a complete design, hopefully all the properties acquired, have a story to tell and show the public, and talk about a voted 0.2 voter approved tax, which would also provide us the ability to then leverage and bond to help pay for this construction. So overall, at this point, we think it's roughly a $15 million project. And with this, again, 0% growth, we're sitting on $11 million of revenue.
No, I'm going to speak for myself. Since I was one of the ones that asked for this, the slides to help visualize this. I think one of the things that I didn't have a picture of was that we'd be doing the 1% for 3 years and then possibly looking at a 2% in years 4 through 10. I think that's the way it was discussed. Would it be possible to do a slide showing, like one more slide, or even modifying this one to say, hey, this is what it looks like with the 1% for 3 years, the councilmatic, and then the 2% going out in years 4 through 10. That would help me understand where we are in the net difference.
That's not a problem at all, Jay. And in reality, we've got the pathway behind it. We have REIT and other alternatives available to us for this, what we hope is a $3.5 million deficit. Until we have the design done and the right of way acquired, we don't know if that's a $2 million deficit or a $7 million deficit. That's why it's so important to have the design finished and the right of way, so we really know what the number is. We might be able to live with a 1% or a 1/10, excuse me, because the hole in the bucket isn't very big, but we might find out that bucket hole is really big. And there's always, Chris Hammer keeps saying he's going to land that next grant to solve this problem. And that'd be great if it happens, but I think we got to have a better plan than that. And maybe that grant, if we've got, all but $4 million of a $14 million project funded, I think it's a pretty competitive grant. Now, we don't want, the idea here is to get away from federal money, because we're not going to acquire this right away through federalized processes, which will save us a lot of money. But there's some state grants that won't force us to federalize the project. So maybe we can land a $4 or $5 million state grant.
Yeah, Mayor, and I'm completely behind it. I was just saying that when we talked this in council, again, speaking only for myself, and I know that Fred and Scott were a little bit there, it was making that switch from the 1/10 of 1% to 2/10 of 1% that was causing a little bit of confusion. I have a better understanding looking at this saying, hey, we're only talking about that 1/10 right now for the 10 years, and we'll cross that bridge in three years when we finish the design. And maybe that's the way to pitch it, because there was a little bit of confusion was, do we take off that 1/10% because we're going for the 2/10? When we talked about it for having it that period of time. That's all I'm saying. This helped a lot. So thank you, Noah.
Well, I would add, and I appreciate this is new to the discussion, but we have greater transportation issues than just Bethel. I know that's the one that's causing us the most grief, but we could use, if the voters were to approve with 2/10 and we could finish Bethel and we had time left over, there's no reason why we can't use that to repave our streets. It's a revenue source that we could use, but more discussion needed, obviously.
I think this is designed as a capital project or a capital tool, not a, and I've got, as I've discussed with you guys, we need a dedicated source for preservation and maintenance.
Well, the sales tax is a dedicated source. It's not limited to just capital. Although there's going to be a lot of discussion with the community, but
yeah.
I raised the issue that if we're successful with getting grant funding that help pay for this, that 2/10 would certainly go a long way towards other projects, not just Bethel.
Certainly. And I would recommend that we, on the heels of this design, because we have traffic impact fees to fund it that have to be used for certain projects, that we immediately get on the design of Bethel and Lund roundabout, because we need an outlet off of Bethel that gets us to the freeway, that we're not dependent on the state of Washington to build a project.
Well, and I just think if you're going to go to the community, as you and I have talked, Rob, and ask them for some sales tax dollars, that they need to see what the potential benefit is in their neighborhood as well.
Yeah.
And paving their streets is a benefit. More to come,
Yes.
you know.
So I mean, this is my last slide, so I was trying to keep it short and concise to help kind of, facilitate discussion. Jay, you asked for an additional row there. I can build that in again for the discussion purposes, so you can see the revenue change. Is there anything else, or is this the right level for the full council discussion?
I think it's the right level. That clarifying on the 3 years to the 10 years really helped me. So, about what we're trying to do on design and then construction. So that's my two cents.
I agree.
How long can the term of the 2/10 go if it's voted by the public? How far does that
20
stretch out?
years.
20 years. Okay. So if it started in year 4, we'd be looking at 26 to 45. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the assumption we're making.
Okay.
I don't think it's been done yet, so it's not really clear, but the legislation is clear, but it is clear that it can be used for the debt service obligations issued against it.
A lot of paving.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
That I think that would be an easier sell for the community to say, yeah, we needed 2/10. We want to focus initially on Bethel, but we want to continue with
Yep.
fixing all of our transportation issues or streets.
That's right.
I'm going to continue to push as we fit, we're wrapping up our utility discussion, and that adding to that utility tax to create $1 million a year to go to, because what we're doing this year is $1 million. And we need to be doing what we're doing this year every year to make even move the needle. So if we can get a dedicated source of funding from utility taxes that we're not, looking to pay for people and other things with, or equipment, I think we can start moving the needle on street paving.
Yeah, all right, good for me.
Yeah, and the beauty of that while we could go get 2/10 or 3/10 from the voters, we have debt limits too, and we got to be conscious of that. And our streets aren't the only need we have, potentially for, we have utilities and other capital needs too that we got to keep in mind for our debt service. Our bonding capacity is what I'm referring to.
Well, we should have, with the growth that we're seeing in the city, that should be
It's growing.
larger. So,
Yep, it's growing.
okay, other than having the item 4 on the agenda, is there anything else that needs to be discussed?
Good meeting.
Yep. Thank you all. See you tomorrow
Yep.
in person.
Alrighty,
Yep. See you tomorrow.
thanks, everybody, and the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Night.